Okay, first of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Joan Lukoski. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. But I've been with the CTSI for a reasonable number of years now. And I was recruited to work with the CTSI because I've had years of NIH funding. And I've always worked in professional development of grad students, postdocs, and faculty. And so it's really an ideal fit for me because I also direct the master's program in clinical and translational sciences. And both Jody Saunders, who you'll meet in just a second, we both work with the graduate students in the CTS program. That being said, I also am a big fan of getting support when you're writing a grant because it's a tremendous amount of work, but it helps if there are a group of individuals that can help support what you're doing. Good. Jody, quick introduction, and Jody's our technical person today. So if anything happens while I'm busy chatting, reach out to Jody first. Okay, Jody?
Yes, hi, I'm Jody Saunders, and I am the Professional Development Senior Coordinator here at CTSI.
Let's go around the room real quickly. And if Kim, I'm going to just start with you. Just you know, who you are, where you are.
Nice to see you all. Excuse me, I'm Kim Cadoto, Director of Research and Quality at the Heart and Vascular Institute. Nice to meet you.
Good, thanks. Dominique.
Hi, I'm Dominique Bellino. I am a research assistant professor at the Cancer Institute, and I joined WVU end of April this year. So I'm looking forward to learning what resources there are here.
Excellent. Yep. Dr. Wayne, right?
Hello.
We have a Leah and a Leah, so we have to be careful.
My name is Lei Wang. I'm a postdoc at the WVU. Yeah.
Great.
Nice to meet you.
Who are you working with for your postdoc?
Yeah, I'm a postdoc.
Right, but with who?
My mentor is Michael Hu.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Yeah, my research is bioinformatics and cancer, multiple myeloma.
Excellent. Good. Leah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leah Worley. I'm a pediatric surgeon at the Children's Hospital, and yeah, recently joined WVU. Oh, sorry about that echo. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Sorry.
It's perfect. Good.
Okay.
And Bryce, just so their group has a sense of who you are.
Hi, Franz Weaver, Associate Professor. I'm a health economist in the Department of Health Policy Management and Leadership in the School of Public Health.
Excellent. And Bryce?
Bryce Weaver, I'm the Associate Director of Survey Analytics at Health Affairs Institute. And I've also in the past been a lead statistician on, well, I was the signatory on 3 clinical trials, but I was on the lead on many others.
Great. Well, first of all, Happy New Year. And congratulations, you've made it through the first week of winter, but I think there's more to come. So I think it's coming this weekend. So, and as folks come in, we'll welcome them. And Rachel, we're just getting started. If you want to quickly unmute and just introduce yourself, that's good. And if not, we'll get going.
Hi there. Oh,
you hear me?
Hi. Yep. How are you doing? My name's Rachel Alvarez. Apologies for being a little late. I am a research assistant professor in the Department of Medical Oncology.
Great. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Okay. I think I want to make sure, if for those of you who are new, that one of the aspects of CTSI is we are a statewide group that is funded through the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. So you may see folks on this call today that are from other institutions around the state, and we welcome them too. The big picture goal for proposal development services, which I'm going to focus on today, is really to support you as an investigators being prepared to submit competitive applications for extramural funding. That being said, CTSI has pilot funding for internal funding. And Josh Taylor, who's the coordinator for the Pilot Corps, is readily available to help support you with internal submissions. And there are lots of other folks on the clinical trial side, the Center of Excellence. If you need to develop an IRB proposal or you're working on a protocol, lots of folks to help there. If you need some biostatistical support, we have a whole core called BIRD that has lots of data analytic resources. I'm really going to focus today on what we call grant writing programs. But again, we're just one piece of CTSI. So my agenda for today is first to take you through what's the process of a grant writing group, essentially why bother, and then talk about the specific offerings that are ongoing. And over the next few weeks and into February, you'll see announcements for new grant writing groups forming for the June submission. But keep in mind, we offer these grant writing groups 3 times a year in advance of each of the NIH submission deadlines. So if you're listening and participating today, you may be already thinking of a submission in June, but perhaps you're thinking ahead to next October or a year from now, February 2026, which seems far away, but when it comes to grant writing, it's not that far away. We'll save a little bit of time to chat about the application process, some editorial services we have for faculty, and then time for Q&A. And please feel free to raise your hand or interrupt if there's something that's not clear as I'm going through it. So when it comes to grant writing, there are lots of challenges. Always, and this is really true with NIH right now, the information for what goes into a proposal keeps changing. And for example, come next Monday, January 13th, WVU is launching a new procedure for pre-award called WRAP, W-R-A-P. And I've gone to some of the trainings. Each of us will have to become familiar with it to do our conflict of interest. So getting the current information is always one of the challenges. Sometimes you have to figure out what's the best fit. Is my idea better for an R03? Gee, I'm thinking of an R15. Am I eligible? Why do an R01 when maybe I should be doing a K award? And NIH keeps coming out with new award types too. I was at a workshop yesterday for a pre-doc to postdoc transition award called ACE, ACE. The other thing with, pardon me, I'm getting over a cold, with grant writing is absolutely knowing who your audience is and understanding who are you writing this application for. So in grant writing groups, and we'll talk about these ideas of how to communicate your ideas clearly, what are all the elements, who and what's a program official or a PO. But most of all, with grant writing, it's essential before you submit anything externally, you get lots of feedback from your peers and your colleagues who are experts in your field. And take advantage of the senior folks with lots of experience. Last but not least, time management is the big issue. And right now, hopefully we're all refreshed from a good holiday break. The semester, for those of us who have teaching duties, responsibilities, doesn't start till next week. But all that kind of flexibility readily goes away when you start working on an application. So to address these challenges, considering a grant writing group is a terrific opportunity. And I'll share with you, I learned about this type of process when I first started at CTSI from visiting some colleagues at the WVCTSI in San Francisco. And they have several grant writing groups in their CTSA. And again, it's a great institution, so their funding rates on their grants are very high. But the early career faculty are getting funded. And that's the important issue, is how to kind of connect into the system so you can grow your proposal and your research program. So a grant writing group helps give you a learning community, and you'll be with peers who are facing the exact same issues you have, which is, I don't have enough time to write. I'm not sure I've got my aims in the right order. What do I do about the budget? It's a safe space, and a safe space means it's a good place to ask the questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in a larger setting with some of your colleagues. Most of all, it helps avoid some of the isolation and stress that is common with grant writing, because in part you're very isolated while you're writing. So this is important. So how are the grant writing groups structured? They're typically 4 to 6 individuals working on a grant proposal of the similar type, and a facilitator. And the group meets together on a regular time schedule and works on different sections of the proposal as a way to keep yourself moving along and hold yourself accountable for your writing, but also to get the feedback along the way. So some of the goals I have for grant writing group is it gives a little structure to the grant writing process. It's a way for me to communicate to you what's the newest changes at NIH. And NIH is changing as we speak. And who knows what will happen in a couple months with a new director. But most of all, it'll give you feedback on writing each section of the proposal. And it requires you to be also providing feedback to each other. And that process helps sharpen your insight into how to communicate your ideas more effectively. And again, safe space. You all have your own intellectual property. And part of being in a grant writing group is what we discuss during a session is confidential. And that's also because this is your intellectual property. And most of all, by attempting to de-stress the grant writing process, you're better prepared to get the proposal submitted on time and have it be successful when it heads through a study section review. So to me, the other advantage of a grant writing group, it avoids procrastination. which is writing your proposal 2 weeks before the submission deadline. If you're doing an R01 application or K application, that's a recipe for failure. If you wait until the very end to write your proposal, there won't be enough time for feedback, reflection. There won't be enough time to even discuss your ideas with a program official at the funding institute. So we start the grant writing group process months before the submission deadline. So the upcoming R01 grant writing group will start in February, and the next K group will start close behind that. The R03 and R21s, we have a slightly different timeline, so they start a little later. But again, we go through the same steps, but in a little more accelerated pace. So what's a typical session? The group usually meets for 2 hours. We check in, make sure we can chat with each other on Zoom just fine. And typically as a facilitator, I would give you a presentation on writing a specific aspect of the proposal. Say, for example, writing specific aims. Next up, each member of the grant writing group will have sent their most recent piece of writing around to everyone and present what they're working on and where they're facing challenges. And that's an opportunity for all of us, myself included, to give feedback to each individual who's presenting as to what really worked well, but what's not working quite so well. And then we'll go over what the assignment is for the next session and check out. And again, during the grant writing group meetings, we don't give feedback to each other in a written track changes kind of mode. We save that for after the grant writing group, because if I gave you a summary statement or written feedback before we talked, you'd be focused on what's on the written page. And so this process is iterative. Most grant writing groups meet 5 to 6 times. I've had some groups that meet 7 or 8 sessions because they like working together. So let me give you some examples of what we do with these grant writing groups. And I'll share with you, I've done grant writing groups with individuals writing fellowship applications. For our postdoc, Lei Wang, who's with us today, I help postdocs write K awards. And in addition, there are all sorts of other NIH grants like R34s and R15s, R36s, and the numbers are unlimited. And what we try to do, if there's a type of NIH proposal you'd like to work on, to fit you into the group that best fits the goals of that type of award. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a snapshot of some things we'll talk about in the grant writing group. First of all, this is a lovely picture of Building 1 at NIH. It was the first building, and it's still the headquarters for the Office of the Director. Here's part of the campus, the NIH clinical hospitals on the left. And this is Bethesda, and NIH currently has 27 centers and institutes. And each center and institute has lots of things in common, but they're all different. So if you're applying to the National Cancer Institute, NCI, how they use a K award is quite different from the National Institute on Aging. If you're applying for an R01, heart, lung, and blood, and there are some other program announcements that one could apply for, which is the best fit. So part of applying for external funding to the NIH as to how to navigate this. Now, if we change this picture and made it a picture of NSF in Arlington, Virginia, it would be the same thing. You have to figure out how to navigate your funder. Now, with respect to NIH, it's a wonderful opportunity for support of investigators at different stages. We're not going to talk about fellowship applications today, but those are available. K Awards, we can chat about those because I know several of you are interested. But primarily, the grants between the Ks and the Rs are focused on each of you developing your own independent research program. So even the programs way back as a student, whether you're an MD, PhD student, or just a traditional CTS PhD student, the goal is to get you in the pipeline and being successful at every stage so that you can be the PI of your own research program. Now, with most grants, particularly K Awards, we'll talk about mentoring. And in today's world, for a K Award or even fellowships, typically there's a primary mentor, but co-mentors with complementary expertise, and we go through that. Also, it's important to understand how does the funding work from a large agency, whether it's NSF or DARPA or DoD, but we focus on NIH, which is health related. What's wonderful for those of you doing our grants is that well over 60% of the funding goes to research projects, RPGs. But for those of you still seeking more training support, through thick and thin, and we'll hope it stays the same, about 2% of the NIH budget has always gone to K Awards and the other part to training grants. And some of you may have been on a T32, or maybe you're faculty on a training grant like a T32. But there are all sorts of training grants. I reviewed T35s for one of the institutes recently, and those are summer programs. So, and again, the percentage of what's in the pie may go up and down, but through thick and thin, and we hope with the incoming administration, support for training of new investigators is going to be protected. Notice there's the intramural wedge piece. And again, that would be for the institutes that have an intramural research program. We're a little concerned that might be at risk, but those essentially are for the folks that have laboratories in Rockville and Bethesda or NIOSH, which has facilities in North Carolina and here in Morgantown. One of the other things we go through is what are the success rates and where's the data to understand so you can be an educated consumer. And for those of you thinking of, well, should I do an R01 versus a K award? Well, a K award that's clinically focused has at least an average percentile close to 40. In some cases, it's 60%. And yet, here's doing a new R1, which is a larger budget where you can hire staff. And what are some advantages of doing a renewal of your R1, which is you have a much better chance of being successful in a renewal. And like all funders, NIH has its policies of how they support new and early stage investigators. A new investigator is typically around a 10-year period where you haven't had a major R01. NIH grant is the PI. ESI also is defined, and the definitions go up and down. But under Francis Collins, the director prior to Dr. Bertoloni, for example, NCI, which is a highly competitive institute, would fund higher percentile rates for first R01s, where the average percentile for a seasoned investigator might be a 9 percentile or 8 percentile. They really try to include funding for early career stage investigators. And NCI now has a really cool thing that if your score is under or up to the 10th percentile, they'll actually give you an extra 2 years of funding. So you'll have your 5 years for the R01 and be eligible for what they call a merit award and R37. Credits due to Betsy Nabel, who was the director of Heartland and Blood before Dr. Gibbs, and she got this policy going, and everyone has copied it. One of the things in the grant writing group is I'll show you data that's current. This is from a recent NIH report from the extramural director. And these things are worth looking at carefully because it gives you a sense of strategies. For example, the K23s are this lighter blue. And you can see early on they weren't as many being funded as there are now. And for those of you on the call today who are postdocs, you can see the K99 has taken off. And so it's important for you to do your homework to understand the institute you're applying to and what's their success rate. And the reason is many times your project can be funded or could be potentially funded by several different institutes. I'm a neuroscientist, neuropharmacologist by training. My work could go to NINDS, it could go to NIA, it could go to NIMH, it could go to NIDA. And so the challenge is to pay attention to who in the NIH agencies is most excited about the work you do. You all know you need to have an ERA Commons assigned to you. Your ERA Commons name stays with you for your life. So you actually want to make sure it makes sense. And again, it moves with you when you change institutions. And this is how NIH does its business electronically. I, as a reviewer, work with ERA Commons when I'm reviewing grants. And NIH has now officially gone to requiring everyone with grant submissions beginning in February to have an ORCID ID. And the ORCID ID is much like a social security number once you obtain it. And the group that runs ORCID is an organization. But with this, NIH plans to be able to track return on investment. And so, for example, if you have previously ORCID IDs were just for K awardees and trainees and T32 recipients to see where did they go in their career. But now they want to be able to track your publications and what were the next steps after you received your R21 or your first R01. And in the grant writing groups, most importantly, we review what the grant writing process is in terms of how is it reviewed at NIH. There are tremendous resources. Most grants are managed by CSR, the Center for Scientific Review. There are some exceptions, but the process is the same. And we go through how to determine what study section you might request for your review and understand what your reviewers have to do to come up with a very outstanding score. And then likewise, we focus on the anatomy. What are the different parts of an application? We take these step at a time. And then also, what are some strategies to make sure you can complete your application on time? And always, we start backwards. You start, say, a June date, June 5th for an R01, but needs to get to OSP at your institution before that. And we also, if you're in the health sciences, need to get it to the health sciences. And some departments, not too many here, have some internal reviews. So it's not just when you submit the grant, but how do you have time to get feedback? So for example, one of the grant writing groups I'm working with are planning on February 5th submissions. In order for their K awards to have enough time for their mentors to give them feedback early in January, they need to get their complete draft ready and then work with getting feedback and time to revise and resubmit for the case submission deadline on February 12th. And again, to be competitive, we have to make your proposal has a great idea that can make a difference and minimize any weaknesses. Our reviewers with NIH work in strengths and weaknesses. So this is just an example of the kinds of information we go through. Some of it you likely already know. Some of it may be new to you. And my responsibility as a facilitator is to make sure things are updated. So the kinds of offerings we have, first of all, one is the K Club. And these are NIH mentored career development training awards, and they provide you with salary support primarily. And the gift of salary support is protected time for research. And to be successful, you'll need a mentor or likely a team of mentors, partly because you may not be having your own fully funded independent lab. In fact, if you're already funded, you wouldn't be eligible for the K. So your mentors are a critical part of the application, and you'll need them to do the work. And K awards, whether it's for postdocs or clinical faculty or basic science faculty, you get scored on each of these elements. So you as the candidate, your plan for training, your research plan, your mentors get a score, and the environment and the institutional commitment. I'll share with you, I reviewed a K one time that had not one, but 2 Nobel laureates. And you would think that would be a shoo-in. That caused a huge discussion in studies section because those Nobel laureates are very famous people with big labs. Does that mean that an individual will get the attention they need? So bigger is not necessarily better, okay? The other thing with training awards, K awards, and fellowships, NIH doesn't want you to keep doing what you already do, but add to your knowledge and your skill set. So as a Leah, if you were doing a K, as a surgeon, you come in with a certain level of expertise. They want to see you go exponentially in a new direction. Okay. KO1 is for someone like me who's a basic scientist, and I've had several trainees with KO1s. 75% protected time as minimum. But now we're running into the KO1s being used by different institutes. So for example, NCI only uses a KO1 now for diversity. So if you were a clinician, you'd likely be looking at a KO8. So a KO8 is a mentored clinical scientist award. And again, these require 75% protected time, with the exception if you're in a surgical specialty, you can request 50% effort. And again, your mentors are important for this too. And you'll hear about K23s. Bryce, you may be more familiar with these from having worked on clinical trials. These typically tend to be where the clinical trial folks are working. And again, it's patient-oriented research where the KOA tends to be more mechanistic, not always. And I'll share with you, when I was faculty at Pitt, I was a mentor for a dental student who had a KOA. He was a DDS, and the dental school gave him a KOA to get his advanced degree as a PhD. So I was on his dissertation committee. There is the well-known K99 R00. This has been around now, not quite 20 years, but it's really done well. It is also the only training award so far that non-citizens are eligible for. So this is really attractive to individuals who come from institutions overseas to be a postdoc. And it has 2 phases where during the K99, you stay a postdoc for another 2 years, but the R00 gets you going for 3 years with your own project. And Ks have their unique challenge, because to score well on a K award, you have to get an outstanding score as an applicant. You have to have an excellent training plan. You have to have a research plan that makes sense and matches your training goals, and that you have the mentors with the right expertise that will help you with the research and the training, and your institutional support and commitment is essential. So a K award is telling a very different story about you. It's the one time the grant is focused on you and not we. Most grants, it's a team. So K clubs, again, we offer them 3 times a year. So the applications are now open for the K club, and we like to get your applications in early in February. The real challenge with a K is that you need to have a letter of support from your chair or supervisor saying, not only do you have time to participate in the grant writing group, but when you receive the award, your department is committed to giving you that level of protected time. And why we require the letter up front is we don't want you doing the hard work of writing the K and getting it going. NIH wants to fund it. And then suddenly your department says, we can't afford not to have you, to afford you doing this. So we need you to teach. We need you to be in the clinic. But I will share with you, the first KO8 that was funded went to an orthopedic surgeon here at WVU, Dr. Matt Dietz, who's now department chair. And having this letter from the department chair up front made it very easy for him to accept the award because, as you know, what happens for these kinds of awards, you need a letter from your dean. So Clay Marsh called his chair and said, you know, I don't have money to pay this orthopedic surgeon. And NIH will not let you decrease someone's salary. That's illegal while you're training. But we also know NIH has a salary cap. Right now it's around $226,000. And an orthopedic surgeon makes more than that a year. So his department's support was essential before he spent time writing a proposal. Okay. So if any of you are thinking of a K and you need more guidance on this, reach out. Now, we have two types of research project grants, RPGs, and they're what I call the small ones, R03s, R21s, and then the big one. The R01 is the gold standard for promotion and tenure. And the reason is it's investigator initiated and it's renewable. The R03s and the R21s are 2-year grants, but they're non-renewable. And I'll go through how these are used. So the R03 is NIH's pilot grant award. It's much like the CTSI pilot award, except the amount is bigger. Each of the institutes and centers use this differently. If you go into the NIH website and under grants and fundings and the search funding, you type in R03, sometimes you'll see 250 or more R03s because the institutes, whether it's NCI or NIEHS or NIMH, will put out unique ones because they want to attract pilot grants in a given area. These are limited to 50,000 direct costs, non-renewable. The R21s are actually much more competitive because the amount of funding is larger. And the R21s may be the most difficult NIH grants to get because they're so competitive. But again, these are called exploratory and developmental projects. So if you're an established investigator and you propose an R21 that's just what you're doing, what you're already funded for, NIH won't accept it. They won't award it to you. And it's yet at the same time, established labs will use these R21s to get a new project going in preparation for the next R01. So this can be a wonderful source of funding, but it's highly competitive. And the important one that you probably all are familiar with is the R01. There are parent announcements for R01s. There are also NOCs, NOFOs, NO, Notice of Awards. Typically, you ask for 5 years because some institutes will automatically cut you down to 4 years worth of funding. Dollar limits have changed now, where typically it's $500K for direct funds. But the important part is these are renewable. And so for ESI faculty, this is a big advantage to keep momentum up in your laboratory because as long as you're publishing and productive, you have a high chance of this being renewed. I want to mention too, because we're in an idea state and the CTSI is funded by NIGMS, there's an award called MIRA R35, M-I-R-A. The MIRA R35 comes in 2 flavors. One's for ESI and one for established faculty. And these awards are solely offered by NIGMS. And the Institute of General Medical Science has a very high funding rate of these, upwards of 60%. However, their structure is a little different, and you have to have pre-approval from a program officer before you can submit, which is why I think the funding level is so high as they pre-screen folks. And likewise, there are lots of other grants. I'm currently part of a team working on a PO1. There are U grants. There are lots of other funding mechanisms. But even those funding mechanisms are structured around what goes into an R01. So, for example, the PO1 I'm on that's pending with NCI has 3 faculty with 3 PO1s that are integrated, but the PO1 gives us extra core support that is currently not available at the institution. So our R01 applications are open. That'll close around the end of January. If you're interested, and that's a typo, the June 5th submission. The R01 grant writing group will begin meeting every 2 weeks. And that gets us moving along and getting feedback and making sure the application is coming together so that by the 1st of May, you've got a pretty good application. Okay. In contrast with the small grants, the R03s and the R21s, these applications are limited to 1-page specific aims and 6 pages of text, where the R01s and the Ks are 1 page for specific aims, 12 pages for text. So, much smaller application. So we keep these open, and the groups will start meeting in April and march through, meeting weekly. So it's a very rapid pace. And I'm, like all things with grant writing, you may sign up for the June submission, and when it gets closer to June, in May, you'll evaluate, am I ready to submit in June? Maybe you need to wait and submit in October. Okay. But being part of a grant writing group gives you access to the current information. I'll share with all of you, come May 25th, the biosketches change. And I'm not thrilled about that. But something keeps changing. Okay. Okay, the application process is very straightforward. It's on the website. Contact me, contact Jody. The key thing, if you're doing an R03, an R21, R1, you basically have a draft of your aims, send your biosketch, and it's a draft. And if sometimes I've had to offer multiple grant writing groups because so many people are working on grants. And so, but I try not to have the group size exceed 6 because it gets to be too large. I want to mention we do have editorial services for publication, but this is only for faculty. So if you have a manuscript, it's ready to go. You can put in a request through Jody Saunders and myself, and you can have someone proofread it or copy edit it for you. Takes 3-4 days for this to happen, depending on how busy our editors are. But again, the goal is to make sure you're successful with submitting your papers. We also have some editors that can give you more substantial editing, or even if you're writing a manuscript for say you're trying something for a Nature paper and you've never done that, we can also give you some more intensive work. What we want to do is to remind everyone that the research isn't done until it's published. And that's our commitment to the whole process. And we'll be sending all these slides today to you. Jody will send you a PDF. So with that, I've talked plenty.